Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, many thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule this evening on this Canberra wintry evening, in fact, to join us for the John G. Memorial Lecture. My name is Brendan Taylor, and on behalf of the Strategic and Defence Study Centre, it's really an honour and privilege to be able to welcome you here tonight. A very special welcome to the members of John G's family who are present with us tonight, Christina, Rebecca, Rose and Nicholas. And a very special welcome also to Rod Barton and Bob Matthews, who are also here and who originally conceived the idea of this lecture this lecture series honouring John G and his work. Finally, a heartfelt thanks to the absolutely stellar support we've received from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and also from Miss Olivia Cable here at the ANU to make tonight's event possible. It remains for me now just to introduce the chair of this evening's lecture, Professor Gareth Evans. Professor Evans is someone who truly does need no introduction. He's currently Chancellor at the ANU, but he was previously one of Australia's longest serving foreign ministers, known internationally, amongst many other things, for his role in bringing the International Chemical Weapons Convention to a conclusion, and also for initiating the Canberra Commission on the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Indeed, contributing to a long and distinguished lineage of Australians who have influenced the practice of arms control and non-proliferation, including, of course, John G himself, it is difficult to think of an Australian today who has had a greater international presence or profile in this area, including in his current role as co-chair of the International Commission on Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. As some of you may recall, he also delivered the inaugural John G Memorial Lecture in 2007. Without further ado, Gareth, many thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us again this evening, and could I now welcome you to the podium to introduce our speaker.
Thanks very much, Brendan. Distinguished guests, excellencies, distinguished guests of all members of the John G family, Rebecca, Christina, Nicholas and Sister Rose. Terrific to have you with us, ladies and gentlemen. News from Syria in recent days, with both confirmation by the Assad regime that it does possess stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons, and reports that those weapons have moved in recent weeks to locations where they might be more readily and immediately used, has brought chemical weapons and the role of the Chemical Weapons Convention back onto the world's front pages for the first time for quite a number of years. In the lecture, which we're going to be privileged to hear this evening from the Director General of the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, His Excellency Ahmet Uzumcu, whom I shall introduce in just a moment, would not be very timely as a result. But first, let me say something about the man for whom this lecture series, in his 6th year, is named, the late John G, who desperately sadly for his family, his friends, his colleagues, was struck down by brain tumour in 2007. John's contribution to the cause of global arms control, and particularly outlawing of chemical weapons, really was immeasurable. At the beginning, at least when I first became aware of him and what he was up to, in 1985, as the then Chemical and Biological Weapons Desk Officer in the Disarmament Division of the Foreign Affairs Department, re-energised by my predecessor as Foreign Minister Bill Hayden, he was responsible almost single-handedly for the establishment of the Australia Group. This was founded in the wake of the use of chemical weapons by Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq War, with the objective of denying access by countries of proliferation concerned to chemical agents and chemicals and biological agents, precursors and dual-use equipment, which could be used in CBW programs. In the mid-1980s, again, John started to take a very close interest in the long-stalled negotiations for a chemical weapons convention, and working closely with the defence science and technology scientist Bob Matthews, who's here somewhere, and Shirley Freeman, who also here, drafted the critical path for the acceleration of those negotiations, focusing particularly on the need to get industry support for a verification regime. All of which effort, along with that of a number of other extraordinarily committed officers that I worked very closely with over those years, ultimately bore fruit in the conclusion of the treaty in 1992, which is an international achievement which I think Australia can continue to be very proud of. In 1991, John was appointed by the UN Secretary-General to the UN Special Commission, or UNSCOM, which had been set up to oversee the elimination of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction after the First Iraq War. In his capacity as coordinator of its Chemical and Biological Weapons Working Group, John played a really critical role in developing the Commission's on-site inspection capability, which was, unhappily all too belatedly, as we now know, subsequently recognised as having done an outstanding job in ensuring the actual dismantling and destruction of Iraq's chemical and biological weapons capabilities. In 1993, John was appointed Director of the Verification Division of the new OPCW, the organisation, the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, as DG is with us here tonight. Then being set up in The Hague under the Convention, charged with the complex and politically extremely sensitive task of developing and implementing all the institutions and procedures necessary to verify compliance with the Convention. When the Convention entered into force, finally in 1997, John became OPCW's Deputy Director General, a position he held with, I know personally, enormous respect from his peers, subordinates, political masters, until he left in circumstances which I have to say cast absolutely no reflection on his competence or integrity. In fact, the contrary, in March 2003. In a very widely quoted funeral tribute, his former Russian colleague at the OPCW, Mikhail Vodenikov, said this of John's role. Today, almost 1/3 of the world's chemical weapons and 2/3 of its production capacity have been destroyed. Much of the credit for these truly historic accomplishments, without exaggeration, goes to John G. Few can claim such a legacy. Indeed, they can't. And moreover, John achieved what he did, I should say, in a distinctively calm, patient, quiet, reserved, very civilised way, which won immense admiration and affection from his colleagues. He relied on intelligence, well-informed, good humour, patient, subdued but persuasive argument, with no one ever able to remember him raising his voice. As I said a little shamefacedly in giving the inaugural G lecture, a role model for us all. We're absolutely delighted that tonight's lecture, Chemical Weapons Disarmament and Non-Proliferation in the Modern World, is being delivered by the world's most senior and distinguished practitioner now in the field, His Excellency Ahmet Uzumcu, who has been Director General of the OPCW since December 2009. Mr Üzümcü is, as was John G., a career diplomat, and one with vast experience, very high reputation in multilateral diplomacy, in political military affairs, disarmament, non-proliferation issues. He's represented Turkey at the NATO Council, and immediately prior to his present appointment was permanent representative of Turkey to the United Nations Office, and also sailed with it in Geneva. For his lifetime achievements in the field of arms control and disarmament, he received in 2010 an honorary doctorate from the Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations. First, I suspect that many more to come. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome as tonight's 6th John G. Memorial Lecture, Mr. Ahmet Üzümcü.
Professor, the Honourable Gareth Evans, Chancellor of the Australian National University, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm indeed honoured to have been asked to deliver this John G. Memorial Lecture, especially so because of the presence of no less a personage than Professor Evans himself. Known and admired by the world over his important work and contribution to disarmament, I feel privileged in meeting him today on this occasion, which is dedicated to the memory of another preeminent Australian. I should also like to acknowledge the presence of the sister and children of the late Dr. John G. They must be proud of being the children of a great man and sister of a great man like Dr. G. Dr. G will be remembered for its deep understanding of issues involving chemical disarmament and notable contributions to the OPCW as its first Deputy Director General from 1997 to 2003. Dr. G ably guided the organization in taking its first steps as an international treaty body, and we remain indebted to him for his work, which was informed by unmatched experience and expertise in a range of nuclear, biological, and chemical disarmament issues. Ladies and gentlemen, it was not too long ago, in 1997, that the Chemical Weapons Convention entered into force. The Convention establishes a complete, comprehensive, and verifiable ban on an entire category of weapons of mass destruction. This unique treaty was born of the international community's determined efforts to outlaw chemical weapons in a manner free from loopholes or exceptions. It took over a century to reach this goal, and the result constitutes a landmark in the international community's quest for collective security. The present international security architecture would be much weaker without the Chemical Weapons Convention. Securing a world that is without chemical weapons is an objective that significantly advances both disarmament and international law. The OPCW's motto captures the essence of our endeavors, and I quote it, "Working together towards a world free of chemical weapons," unquote. The OPCW has been working quietly yet in a steadfast manner towards realizing this objective. I say quietly because both the Convention and the OPCW are not as well known to the general public as some other legal regimes that cover weapons of mass destruction. But this lack of awareness should not be mistaken for lack of impact. It will not be long before we commemorate the centennial of the first use of chemical weapons on a mass scale. I am referring to the carnage that occurred in what is remembered as the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915 during the First World War. Then and subsequently, these weapons have brought death and tremendous suffering to millions of human beings who were exposed to their destructive power. Chemical weapons have spared neither soldier nor civilian in the many circumstances of their use over the last century. A brief reference to historical developments is important to understand how and why the regime represented by the Chemical Weapons Convention emerged over the course of decades to one that embodies zero tolerance for chemical weapons. The first organized attempt to ban chemical weapons is represented by the 1899 The Hague Convention that proscribed the use of projectiles for the dissemination of what were at the time known as poison gases. Unfortunately, the existence of this legal norm did not prevent the use of chemical weapons during World War I. Chemical weapons claimed more than 1 million casualties. Efforts to establish a stronger legal prohibition led to the conclusion of the 1925 Geneva Protocol that banned the use of both chemical as well as biological weapons. The Geneva Protocol did not, however, prohibit production of chemical weapons. While this legal constraint existed in the background, countries continued to produce and stockpile ever more dangerous types of chemical weapons. The horrors of chemical weapons nevertheless impelled a search for a comprehensive and effective international treaty to ban them. And these efforts went on within the negotiating mechanisms sponsored by the United Nations. However, a more immediate threat emerged on the international stage with the use of chemical weapons in the Iran-Iraq conflict in the 1980s, and by the former regime in Iraq against its civilian population in 1988. They were also used in the mid-90s by terrorists in the well-known attacks in Japan. Thus, while the original motivation to find a durable solution to the problem of chemical weapons may have been concerns relating to the bipolar confrontation of the Cold War, it became evident that the threat of chemical weapons was now more widespread. Following the first Gulf War in 1991, and the chemical weapons dangers illustrated by the actions of Saddam Hussein, the negotiations for the convention in the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva were injected with urgency and purpose. The international community's resolve to outlaw chemical weapons and to agree on their total elimination after almost 20 years of negotiation led to the conclusion of the convention in 1992. The treaty was subsequently opened for signature in 1993 and entered into force in 1997. At the same time, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons commenced its work as the implementing agency of the Convention in The Hague. This year, the Convention completed 15 years of its operation. By any yardstick, this has been an unqualified success in multilateral disarmament. The Convention is the first multilateral treaty that not only establishes a comprehensive prohibition against an entire class of weapons of mass destruction, but does so on non-discriminatory terms and under conditions of strict verification. The Convention does not create any exceptions to the rule that chemical weapons are prohibited for all countries. All state parties have equal rights and obligations. Those who possess chemical weapons must destroy their stockpiles. All countries with chemical industry regarded as capable under the terms of the Convention must allow inspections by the OPCW. The elimination of chemical weapons being one of our core objectives, our team of inspectors have verified the destruction of nearly 3/4 of the total stockpiles declared to the organization. This is the first time in history that weapons of mass destruction have actually been destroyed under an international treaty and under multilateral supervision. The Convention establishes not only the obligation to destroy weapons, but also the facilities that produce those weapons. Consequently, almost every such facility has either been destroyed or converted for peaceful purposes in an irreversible way. Disarmament and non-proliferation go hand in hand. Both involve verification. On the one hand, OPCW verifies the destruction of chemical weapons, and on the other, it seeks to prevent their re-emergence. Also through verification, which in this case extends to the chemical industry. Industry verification and data monitoring are in fact key features of our work. The organization routinely conducts round-the-year inspections of industrial facilities worldwide which produce chemicals that are of relevance to the Convention or are capable of producing such chemicals. There are nearly 5,500 such facilities around the world. All of these are liable to be inspected, and those producing chemicals deemed to be of high risk are regularly inspected by the Secretariat. So far, more than 2,200 such inspections have been carried out in over 80 countries in a random manner. The aim is to ensure that the production of chemicals remains dedicated to peaceful purposes only, and that no diversion takes place that is contrary to the Convention. In addition, the OPCW implements a global monitoring regime over the exports and imports of chemicals covered by the Convention. Transfers of certain chemicals classified according to the possibility that they can be used as chemical weapons is strictly controlled among member states, and in certain cases prohibited with states that are not parties to the Convention. Member states are required to carefully monitor such transfers and to report relevant information to the Secretariat of the OPCW. A multilateral organization is a model of diversity. Amongst our membership are countries with advanced chemical industry, as well as those with hardly any. In between, there is a range of countries whose economies are developing or in transition. To cater to the interests and concerns of all states parties, the Convention is described as having 4 pillars. Disarmament and non-proliferation are the 2 pillars that serve the core security interests of the entire membership. The other 2 pillars are international cooperation and assistance and protection against chemical weapons. While an effective and efficient verification and inspections regime is an important tool tool to achieve the objectives of the Convention, the OPCW is equally dedicated to foster the economic or technological development of its parties in the peaceful uses of chemistry. In accordance with its Article 11, the Convention provides for the promotion of international cooperation and exchange of scientific and technological information in the field of peaceful chemical activities. The organization has established a wide range of programs to further this important objective, including, for instance, the training of young chemists and the promotion of analytical laboratory skills. Other initiatives provide funding for research projects and organize internships for qualified people at world-class research institutions. OPCW activities in this area offer significant benefits to our state parties, and they promote a sense of belonging and ownership amongst them, especially those whose economies are developing or in transition. Despite the existence and progressive strengthening of clear norms against chemical weapons, there can never be a certainty against the criminal or terrorist use of either chemical weapons or the use of toxic chemicals as weapons. Especially within the contemporary international security environment, there is a real threat of non-state entities getting hold of dangerous weapons to use them for unlawful purposes. In this area, Article 10 of the Convention provides for mechanisms designed to assist state parties, particularly by enhancing their preparedness and capabilities to react to a possible attack involving chemical weapons. At the same time, a coordination mechanism among member states is envisaged that would mobilize the provision of emergency assistance to the country that has been subjected to a threat of attack or actual attack. The development of national preparedness and of mechanisms for emergency assistance in case of such an attack is an essential part of the security assurance that states receive by joining the Convention. Accordingly, the Secretariat is working extensively with our state parties with a view to ensuring effective emergency response capacity should the need ever arise. While we progress steadily towards the goals of the Convention, we are also aware of the need to ensure that its fundamental norms must continue to be strengthened in an ever-changing and challenging future. As we approach the completion of the destruction of declared arsenals of chemical weapons, the organization will be expected to progressively concentrate the larger percentage of its resources to the objective of preventing the re-emergence of chemical weapons. This entails attention to a number of areas. First, the organization will need to continue refining and taking to an adequate level the number and intensity of industry inspections. The regime must ensure that all categories of relevant facilities are sufficiently covered by the verification. The global chemical industry is highly dynamic. New products and processes are constantly emerging. The verification regime will need to keep pace with such developments to ensure that the level of confidence remains high. Second, the surveillance of transfers and trade in chemicals will need to be made more rigorous. All state parties should have the ability to fully monitor the import and export of chemicals of concern by enhancing the knowledge and skills of their relevant governmental authorities, especially the customs. OPCW conducts regular training programs for custom officials in our state parties, and these programs are expected to be augmented further. A third and crucial element in the non-proliferation regime of the Convention concerns its effective domestic implementation. This obligation is indispensable for the overall effectiveness of the Convention. It requires that all state parties establish and reinforce the administrative and legislative measures necessary to redress any breach of the Convention by their nationals and in any area under their jurisdiction or control. Compared with other relevant disarmament instruments, OPCW member states have performed better in implementing their obligations. Yet, there is still a need for half of our membership to make further progress in domestic implementation. The relevance of such measures for counter-terrorism purposes is also self-evident. In the context of counterterrorism, the OPCW fully participates in activities organized to support the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1540 and the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy. In those documents, the OPCW was specifically mentioned. Our own activities are guided by the OPCW Working Group on Terrorism and cover subjects of high contemporary importance. We are devoting a special attention to the subject of chemical safety and security. Following a major international conference on the subject hosted by the OPCW last year, we recently held a meeting of experts to identify ways and means in which the organization can better fulfill the expectations of our state parties in this crucial area. Ladies and gentlemen, another outstanding feature of the Convention is the rapidity with which it has gained adherence. The near universal support that the Convention has received is evident from its membership, which currently stands at 188 strong. This means that only 8 members of the UN remain outside the treaty. Universality is indispensable to the success of the Convention. Only thus can there be an assurance that all countries of the world have legally accepted the prohibition of chemical weapons. Given the inhumane nature of those weapons and the fact that they are no longer regarded of much military value, the Convention should be accepted by all nations as a moral imperative. Acceptance of the Convention can serve as an important confidence-building measure, especially in such regions as the Middle East, where there are countries that have not joined the Convention, and Northeast Asia, where 2 countries are not members. The 2010 NPT Review Conference has decided to convene a conference in 2012, before the end of this year, that would consider the question of making the Middle East a zone free from all weapons of mass destruction. The final document of the conference envisages the contribution of international organizations like the OPCW in terms of sharing their experience and lessons learned. Given the importance of this initiative to regional peace in the Middle East, the OPCW looks forward to its participation and contribution to this important endeavor. International treaties, like national constitutions, need to be regarded as living documents. Their provisions are designed to serve broad objectives, and it is those objectives that must at all times be kept in sight. The Convention constitutes a total and permanent prohibition against chemical weapons. It provides for a number of tools that, if fully utilized by state parties, could further enhance its effectiveness. During the rapid developments in the past year, the international community was on several occasions concerned about the potential use of chemical weapons by the former regime in Libya. Fortunately, this did not happen. However, the authorities in Libya discovered a stockpile of chemical weapons that the Gaddafi regime had not declared to the OPCW. This was a clear and serious violation of the Convention by the former Libyan regime. As deterrence against such situations, and also as a means to uncover non-compliance, the Convention provides for short-notice challenge inspections that can be conducted on the territory of any state party. There is no right of refusal in such cases. However, to date, there has not been a challenge inspection anywhere, although the Secretariat keeps itself in readiness to do so if asked. Only a state party has the right to call for a challenge inspection. The Secretariat does not have such an authority, nor is it empowered or resourced to collect independently information that would have determined if a state party was concealing any facts that it should have otherwise declared. Appropriate measures are being implemented by the Libyan authorities to ascertain that all sites in all regions of the country are free from any materials likely to be relevant to the Chemical Weapons Convention. And we continue to work closely with them to ensure that Libya fulfills its obligations under the Convention. The experience, however, vividly illustrates that handling chemical weapons issues in a conflict situation can never be an easy or predictable exercise. It also highlights the need for state parties to consider how they can more effectively utilize some of the verification tools made available in the Convention, such as challenge inspections. The case of Syria is another instance where concerns relating to chemical weapons remain high. The announcement by the Syrian government the other day tends to confirm the reported existence of chemical weapons. Syria is not a state party to the Convention, and therefore the OPCW verification regime does not extend to Syria. In order to authenticate the nature and quantities of chemical weapons in Syria, as suggested in the press reports and now alluded to by the Syrian government itself, the OPCW needs to conduct physical inspections at the concerned facilities. As to situations involving non-parties, the Convention does provide for an important measure that can be invoked if the situation so warrants. The OPCW is authorized under the Convention for closely cooperating with the United Nations by placing its resources at the disposal of the Secretary General to conduct an investigation of alleged use of chemical weapons in a state not party to the Convention. This provision, like challenge inspections, has never been used. But here again, the Secretariat stands ready to provide its expertise should the international community collectively decide to address a particular situation. Ladies and gentlemen, 15 years is not a long time in the life of an international organization. Yet there is a record of accomplishments in this short time that should make each and every state party quite proud. They have consistently worked in a constructive spirit of cooperation. Every country stands to benefit from this exemplary multilateralism. But time brings change and new challenges. Our main preoccupation in the next few years will be to set a new direction for the organization. Disarmament has remained for all these years the main focus of attention and the most resource-demanding undertaking. In the next 2 to 3 years, only a fraction of the stockpiles of chemical weapons will remain to be destroyed. As the destruction phase of chemical weapons winds down, we have to ensure that this does not lead to the perception of the conclusion of our mission. The Convention is a treaty of indefinite duration. In essence, it represents a permanent prohibition on chemical weapons. Once disarmament is complete, such prohibition will only endure through vigilance, adaptation, and sustaining the political support of our state parties. This, in short, is the challenge of the transition that awaits our organization. New developments in science and technology may increase the risk that harmful activities prohibited under the Convention are undertaken. At the same time, the rapid evolution of chemical industry that is occurring on a global scale may create new challenges in the field of verification. While we need to keep abreast of the developments, we also need to reach out to the scientific and academic communities. We need to strengthen the ethics that underpins their work and to make the norms of the Convention more widely known. Since becoming Director General, I have paid particular attention to such outreach and public diplomacy imperatives. While we will face such new tasks, the constraints imposed by the global financial situation are equally real. This means structural readjustments within the organization so that we are able to do more for less. On my part, I am resolved to bring about changes within the organization that will make it fit for the purpose without compromising on our goals or operational requirements. The entire process of change, however, requires the cooperation, understanding, and full involvement of state parties, as well as the support of stakeholders, such as, in particular, the chemical industry. I feel confident that Australia, with its tradition of strong support for the Convention ever since the time of its negotiation, will play its part in this endeavor. In conclusion, allow me to say that while our world often seems divided on issues that are of vital importance to us collectively, there is no alternative but to persist in our faith in multilateralism. The Chemical Weapons Convention and the OPCW do offer a model of the success of multilateralism. The credit for this belongs to our state parties, who have repeatedly shown the will to remain constructive and forward-looking. Today, when we face a time of change, we need to redouble our efforts to ensure that one of the finest achievements in disarmament can be strengthened for all times to come. For this, we must work together to continue towards a world free of chemical weapons and to ensure collectively that these terrible weapons will never again re-emerge. I thank you for your attention.
Professor Uzumcu has very kindly indicated his willingness to respond to questions, so the floor is now open. People could identify themselves very briefly if their questions reasonably succinct, that would be appreciated. So, over to you. Yes, gentlemen.
Ramesh Thakur from the Australian National University. Excellency, how do you explain the fact that there hasn't been a single challenge inspection so far?
Very good question. In fact, there are two schools of thought on this, especially the godfathers of among the godfathers of the convention itself. One school of thought argues that this was a great success, that it wasn't used, but it served as a deterrence, an efficient, effective deterrence, and it prevented any violation or non-compliance of the convention in the past 15 years. Another school of thought argues that it should have been used, and it should have become even a routine inspection mechanism, and without having political complexities. Since the time has passed now, I think the downside of it is that it's become less likely, in fact, to invoke such a mechanism, because it would be perceived by many states parties as a political move rather than an effective verification mechanism which had the aim to build confidence. Nevertheless, there are other mechanisms which are just below the invocation of challenge inspection, and which allow the states parties that may have some questions about the activities of other states parties, by invoking Article 9 of the Convention, they may seek clarifications bilaterally, and if they are not satisfied by the responses they receive, they may seize the Executive Council and in fact seek further clarification through the Executive Council. So this mechanism of bilateral consultations, in fact, has functioned quite well to our knowledge, because we don't know the specifics. Those bilateral exchanges are not shared by others nor by with the Secretariat. But the second step, in fact, asking the Executive Council was never, did never happen, nor the challenge inspection.
Questions? Let me ask. Oh, yes.
Thank you. Embassy of Austria. As you have,
speak up a little.
Sorry, Embassy of Austria, you have also, referring also to the case of Syria, referred to the fact that the UN Secretary General could avail himself of requesting an inspection by OPCW. Now, maybe that's a question to both of you. In referring to the matter of the responsibility to protect, is that something that is that the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is likely to do? Thank you.
So just to add my own question to that, you said the convention, I should remember this because we helped draft it, made provision for such a request by the SG in the case of the use of chemical weapons.
That's correct.
What about
or alleged use? Yes.
Yeah, use. But what about in the context simply of possession or capability of use, which is the current situation in Syria? That get any scope at all for SG's utilisation of this part of the convention? As the responsibility to protect the dimension of this, I really don't think that gets triggered until in terms of formal response, at least until you get something which does resemble a mass atrocity crime. Of course, if such a crime were to occur, then all hell would break loose, I think, in terms of the international reaction, and that principle would certainly be invoked in that context. But I don't think it helps us particularly with the present situation, but over to you, Ambassador, for the specific.
In the case of alleged use, in fact, the provisions of the Convention in its annex, verification annex, are quite clear, and the UN Secretary General may request, in fact, to put at his disposal the resources of the OPCW for an investigation of this use, possible use. As far as other possible actions are concerned, there is no provision within the Convention. Nevertheless, there is a bilateral relationship agreement concluded in 2000 between the OPCW and the United Nations. And in this agreement, cooperation in general terms, in fact, was mentioned on several paragraphs. And for instance, if there is a UN Security Council resolution or General Assembly resolution, the Secretary General could transmit them to myself as Director General, which I should share immediately with the states parties. And in such cases, some specific actions, in fact, may be requested and may be undertaken. What the OPCW could offer in such situations, I believe that they would be more of a technical nature, technical assistance, support, advisors through our experts. This is the only international organization, in fact, which possesses such an expertise in the field of chemical weapons. So over the 15 past years, we were able to develop further this expertise, and there are challenges to retain it in the future. But at present, I guess we would be able to provide some support for possible operations and missions. On Syria's responsibilities, in fact, Syria is a party to the 1925 Geneva Protocol, so it has the obligation not to use chemical and biological weapons, and therefore, if they do so, they should be held accountable by the international community.
Can I just ask myself, of the 8 states which are not members of the treaty, how many are reasonably suspected of possessing chemical weapons? We know now about Syria, which was long suspected. We think we know about North Korea. Are there any others? Because in the list you've got, as I remember, Somalia and Israel, which are signed but not ratified, a number of others as well. I know you've got to be very diplomatic about the member states, but you can afford to be a little less diplomatic perhaps about the non-members.
A diplomat is always a diplomat. One has to take into account that some of them may soon become states parties. And Myanmar is, we hope, one of them, actually. We hope that Australia will help us in this respect, encouraging Myanmar to ratify the convention as soon as possible. We understand they were not able to do it during the military rule, but it's been already more than a year, so they were encouraging signs in this country, and we were able to have some contacts. We sent a delegation, and hopefully will become soon a party. In the case of Myanmar, we didn't hear anything about the possible stockpiles of chemical weapons. North Korea, you mentioned it. There are quite alarming reports about the existence of weapons in this country. In Africa, Somalia, because of domestic reasons, but Angola, we don't know for what reason, didn't yet join the convention. We understand there is no particular reason for it, so we have been in touch with them on several occasions, and we encourage them, in fact, to do it as early as possible. South Sudan is one of the 8, so this is a new state. And for them, in fact, it shouldn't be really complicated. They should just send a letter to the UN Secretary General, who is the depository of the convention, and I think they can do it anytime. But for the other 3 countries that we mentioned earlier, for Syria, the question is in fact now clear, more clear than before. And for Egypt, we don't have any convincing substantiated reports of possible existence, nor for Israel, so we didn't see any reports. But the issue of joining the Convention of Chemical Weapons in this part of the world is clearly linked to the nuclear issue and to the nuclear capacity of Israel. So, and for several years, for the past 15 years, no progress was achieved. So we hope that this conference, which is planned, if the situation permits and if it takes place, will pave the way for, for their membership.
Hi, Ian. This is Attorney General's Department, Chemical Security. Just had one question in regards to, you mentioned, well, Australia obviously is a very strong participant of CWC, and in terms of import and manufacture of mixtures being 10%, they've gone with a very conservative view in comparison to the 30% that's set by the Chemical Weapons Convention. You mentioned that you talked about mixtures as such, well, alternative substitutes of chemicals. Is there a likely chance of, in our country, in Australia, there's a few chemicals that are pretty much on our list of the CWC, the Schedule 3 chemicals as such, that we share. Is there a likely chance of any of those chemicals being changed or ratified as such, or any of those chemicals being changed over time from the Schedule 1 right down to the Schedule 3?
I don't think that there would be such drastic changes. And the list of scheduled chemicals, in fact, was, as you know, annexed to the convention once it was concluded. There are some suggestions to review this list by experts, but I don't see much appetite on the part of state parties to do it at the moment.
What can you say about the current enthusiasm of the world's chemical industry for support for the really quite rigorous obligations, potential inspections and so on that are associated with this? I mean, the key to the breakthrough, as I remember in the early 90s on the convention itself, was getting that support. We had a big government industry conference here in Australia, which many of you will remember, that generated that support. Is it still alive and well, or the passage of time led to any backsliding?
Actually, maybe not backsliding, but the involvement of the chemical industry in the implementation of the convention was not as active as it used to be at the initial stage. In fact, the chemical industry, as I was told, that they was involved also in the negotiation phase, which was good. Later on, clearly, they remained as a partner for, in terms of receiving inspections and so on. But the attitude of the chemical industry in general varies from one country to another. Some of them see as a burden and those inspections, and they don't want to receive more. So they try to influence the positions of their countries to oppose, in fact, to any increase in the number of inspections, such inspections. And they don't want them to be more intrusive. But in other countries, in fact, they seem to be more cooperative. And I think the case of Australia is really exemplary in this respect. I had a meeting in Sydney with the representatives of chemical industry, and I was very encouraged. The main issue is that the chemical industry, quite naturally, does not pay primary attention to the security aspects of the convention, whereas for the governments, in fact, the security component of the convention and their obligations come forward. So there should be a balance in that, and we should try to strike the right balance globally, not only in certain states parties. So this remains a challenge, and we are all going to organize in the preparation for the review conference next year some meetings with the chemical industry representatives. The first one will take place in September, on 24th September in The Hague, and we want to follow up with other meetings.
Brooke Shapley, Department of Defence. In the event that a state party to the convention enters Syria in an attempt to secure their chemical weapons, what obligations do they have under the convention if they gain possession of them?
I think this is a tough question. Very interesting. Let me say that during the Gulf crisis, in fact, some forces from the US and the UK did control the chemical weapons in Iraq and destroyed some of them. And this has become an issue later on in the OPCW. Some states parties, in fact, claim that this was a non-compliance, whereas those two countries, in fact, argued that this was done fully in compliance with the convention because this was aimed to protect lives, and there was a certain urgency not to wait the verification of the convention. So normally the weapons must be destroyed under the verification of the convention, and this is an obligation, in fact, which compels all states parties, and specifically in the case of Syria, I don't think that any such operation can be based on the Chemical Weapons Convention as such.
Ambassador, in October 2003, Colonel Production... Everybody knows you, Ron Hiskin, Australian National University, I beg your pardon. He cut that surprising deal with the United States and the United Kingdom, which said, I'm getting out of the WMD business, come in and verify the fact that I'm getting out of it. But there was a Syrian oversight, which you mentioned, the recent discovery of a stockpile. Could you say anything at all about the circumstances of that oversight?
In Libya?
Yeah.
No. Actually, we have very little information. We raised the question with the Libyan authorities. We received, I should say, a provisional response and telling us that they are looking into the matter, because the concern is whether other stockpiles exist in other parts of the country. This is a huge country, in fact, not as big as Australia, but still big. So that's the main concern, and we don't know whether it was, in fact, deliberately hidden by the previous regime. But what we welcomed, in fact, the transparency shown by the transitional government in Libya, and they seem to be very cooperative, transparent, open. They declared those weapons. They asked our technical assistance. Our inspectors were able to go to this site 3 times, in fact, in the past 6 months, and they helped and supported these missions, although they were quite complex missions. So we don't know really what was the particular reason. We hope to know it soon.
Yes.
John McFarlane from Australian National University. Ambassador, you described in great detail, very persuasively, the role of the Commission in regard to chemical weapons. There's another area in the chemical industry which is of immediate concern, and that is relating to illicit drugs, the role of the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, and their concern about psychotropic drugs and precursor chemicals. Does your Commission have a close relationship and an exchange of information with UNODC in relation to chemical industry generally and the possibility of morphing of chemical derivatives from one to another form of threat.
In fact, as you mentioned, there is another organization, another agency, UN agency, which deals with this. OPCW, by the way, is not part of the UN system. This is autonomous, and we are outside the UN system, although we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have some relationship arrangements. I don't think there's an overlap or duplication between the two organizations, but there's clearly a need for closer cooperation between the OPCW and this agency, and as well as with other UN agencies like WHO, UN OCHA, and Interpol in certain cases. These consultations, in fact, exchanges are being carried out at technical level. They get together from time to time. We don't have formal arrangements, and in order to do it, we should have concluded some MOUs and so on to formalize such a cooperation, and this becomes a little more complicated, and we prefer to act and cooperate in practice.
In your earlier incarnations, you had a lot to do with nuclear weapons and context of NATO, biological weapons, presumably in the context of your role in Geneva. Are you able to draw any lessons for the more robust treaty environment in biological weapons from the Chemical Weapons Convention experience? Verification regimes, is it possible?
Mm-hmm.
What lessons, in other words, are to be learnt, if any, do you think, from the success of the CWC Convention and its operational implementation for the other two categories of weapons of mass destruction? Is there anything at all, is there any transferability, do you think, of that experience, or is it a particular dynamic of its own which is unrepeatable?
Actually, particularly for the biological convention, I think the verification mechanism of the CWC could provide a model, and I don't actually argue that I would argue that it should be identical, but nevertheless several lessons could be drawn, and several parts of the verification provisions could be emulated by such a convention and regime if there is an agreement on this. There were, as you know, several attempts, in fact, to introduce the verification mechanism for the Biological Weapons Convention, but they failed so far. And as far as the nuclear issue, I know that some NGOs, in fact, worked on this, and they developed some documents based on the Chemical Weapons Convention and its implementation, and according to their views, in fact, indeed the CWC could be a model for the verification of multilateral nuclear disarmament. I didn't really study it well, and I wouldn't be able to provide an expert view on this, but certainly there would be a lot of similarities.
Just one more question of my own, and that is that an organisation which is as successful as you have been in meeting its objectives, and in particular reducing those stockpiles quite dramatically, and steady progress towards complete elimination of all those the world knows about. Is there a chance that the organisation will be a prisoner of its own success, and that complacency will set in, and that you'll have a hell of a lot of difficulty in maintaining the expertise and the resources necessary for any potential breakout in the future in this environment? Or has Syria changed all that?
In fact, there are risks, and several people say that the OPCW has become a victim of its own success, and the achievements are not well known and recognized. And the representatives of states parties in The Hague do complain about the lack of interest in their capitals on OPCW matters. So there is a need, in fact, to raise some awareness about this organization in the capitals of states parties, I believe, for two reasons. First of all, I think this is a good example of effective multilateralism. This proved that multilateralism can function in the field of arms control and disarmament in a security domain. And this brought together several countries which had different interests in the security field from all parts of the world. And this was able to actually develop a culture of cooperation in the security domain. So in itself, this is a big achievement, and there are national authorities in all countries, all states parties, which are in charge of coordination of the implementation of the convention. They get together regionally every year, as well as once a year in a plenary session in the Hague. So they know each other, they cooperate, they compare notes, and I think this is unique. And therefore, there is really indeed a need to highlight, to emphasize, and in fact to see whether such arrangements or processes can be emulated elsewhere. Secondly, if the states parties do not pay enough attention to the current state of OPCW, may also overlook the challenges that the organization will be facing in the coming 3 to 4 years once the destruction of chemical weapons will be completed. Then there is a very high risk that in fact the resources and the expertise that we possess at the moment may be lost. So that's the risk that I want to highlight during my exchanges with the states parties, which I did here also, and I'll continue to do that. We have set up an advisory panel chaired by Rolf Ekeus from Sweden, and they prepared a report last year, and they made some recommendations about the future priorities of the organization. And there were some discussions on the report. I will do my best to pursue these discussions among states parties and take the necessary actions and decisions during the review conference next year and beyond for keeping this organization as a credible, sustainable, multilateral institution.
There are no more questions. I think we can take that as a demonstration that you're all sated by the comprehensiveness and professionalism of that presentation, which really was outstanding and I think a wonderful tribute to the quality of the organisation and a wonderful demonstration that John G's legacy does in fact very much live on. Within the constraints of diplomacy, I think, Ahmet, you have been very frank and very forthright in describing the world as it now is out there, as you see it and as the organisation is dealing with it. And I think all of us want to see a continuation of the very fine professional efforts, this model of what you can do in this very difficult terrain of weapons of mass destruction is all about. So can I ask all of you to join with me in thanking very warmly again our speaker, Ambassador Ahmet Üzümcü.
Return to this warm hospitality extended to me. I wish just to present a token from our organization to Gareth. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're supposed to be giving you things.